let's look at 4 often overlooked advantages of curved swords. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. Now, obviously curved swords are famous for their cutting capacity. We'll get to that in a second. And not to mention, of course, that straight swords have a bunch of advantages all of their own. But here we're going to look at 4 often overlooked advantages of curved swords. So as mentioned, straight blades have advantages all of their own, but we're not going to be looking at those in this video. We're going to be looking at these, or at least various swords like this that have curved blades. Why have curved blades? Well, most people will be aware that overall curved blades have an advantage in cutting mechanics. So you've probably actually heard that assertion lots of times throughout your life if you're interested in swords, that curved swords cut better than straight swords. In fact, this very much kind of depends on the context, as it were. It depends what you're cutting and how and where from and this kind of stuff, what the target is, all sorts of things. So it's a very complicated topic, something I have dealt with in previous videos, and I'm sure we'll look at again, maybe with tests and this kind of stuff. Perhaps it's something I could collaborate with another person or from another channel, spoiler there. But we're not going to be looking here at why do curved swords cut so well, and generally speaking they do cut pretty well. Instead we're going to look at the 4 overlooked, or should we say less acknowledged advantages of curved swords. And let me know down in the comments how many of these you thought of or knew before, or if any of them were completely new to you. Okay, so the first advantage, and this is quite an important one actually, of curved swords, is that they don't stop so easily. What do I mean by that? Well, if I just grab a straight sword here, so this is a replica of one of the Royal Armourer's swords from the windlass line. With a straight sword, unless you apply some type of oblique angle to the direction in which you're hitting the target, say for example we're passing on a horse, we'll come back to horses in a second, and I hit someone here. A straight blade, being a straight lever essentially, is more likely to stop on the target. That's one example. If it hits, armour for example, or something resistive. But secondly, even if it cuts into a target and meets resistance in the target, such as bone, then it is more likely to enter and then get stuck because it has a straight line lever projecting from your hand. In contrast to that, a curved blade is more likely to drag and slice and cut through and exit the target because it's a curve. So this meeting a target at any sort of angle, it is more likely on average than the straight blade to not get stuck and to drag and draw through and therefore be free. Why is that important? Because your sword is still operable to attack or defend, particularly to defend yourself with, and it's not stuck in or stuck on the target. Now, you can overcome this with a straight blade by making sure you hit the target at an angle, so not completely perpendicular, and that you actually drag across and through the target, so you're simulating in some sense the advantages of the curved blade with the straight blade. So there are ways of mitigating it with a straight blade, but overall, on average, a curved blade makes that a lot easier. And I said I'd mention horses, and very importantly, that point is particularly important when you are passing targets, be they infantry on foot or other cavalry on horseback, when you're passing them at speed on a horse. And in fact, there are many historical accounts of swords getting knocked out of or wrenched out of people's hands when they're on horseback because of the energy involved, the speed involved of meeting the target. So curved blades work particularly well on horseback because they naturally cut through, past, draw through, and don't get stuck on the target, and therefore make it easier to retain the weapon in your hand. Now, the second advantage of curved blades is one that I think not that many people will have thought of, and it's somewhat nuanced and complicated, and it's also related to the previous point. In a sentence, they're less likely to break. Really? Is that true? Well, I'll tell you why. So many times when straight swords break, it is because there is poor edge alignment. They meet the target, and when they meet the target, they roll like this and then flex aggressively, and it snaps the blade. This is particularly a problem, or can be a problem, on horseback, meeting hard targets, or even hitting things like armour and things like this. So that's the first reason. The first reason is that with a curved blade being somewhat easier to keep the edge alignment, but in addition it's less likely to wrap when it hits the target, partly also for the edge alignment reason. It's therefore less likely to aggressively bend and snap for that reason. But there's another reason as well, and that is one of oscillation. So you may or may not know that when you take a straight sword in one hand, if you hit the bottom end, it's very easy to set up an oscillation in the blade. That is because waves travel more or less in straight lines, so the wave will go through here. That would be true of a thrust if I met a resisting target, or indeed if I hit something very hard, the oscillations will travel straight through the blade. Whilst a curved blade does technically oscillate a bit, it doesn't oscillate anything like that. And it's because the blade isn't in a straight line. The waves can't travel in a straight line because it's a curved blade. So therefore, again, the blade is coming under less stress from that perspective, from that point of view. So it is also my observation, this is completely anecdotal, over the years, that curved blades used in reenactment, living history, fencing and historical fencing HEMA, like I do, curved blades tend to last better, be stronger, and also hit a bit harder than most straight blades do. And it should be pointed out that if we take straight, narrow blades, for example, like a rapier, it can be really quite difficult to get that edge aligned well, okay? Because curved blades, it's easy, you can feel the edge alignment in the hand because you've got that tip dragging behind the centre of gravity. But because everything's in a straight line, and in this case quite narrow as well with a rapier, it's harder to align the edge. If you hit a target with poor edge alignment, the blade is more likely to break. So for numerous reasons, I would argue that curved blades are less likely to break. Now this third point, kind of less acknowledged advantages of curved swords, I suspect that most of you will have guessed near the beginning and probably would have assumed it would have been the first points that I'd make. And that is, being curved, they can attack around corners, which is kind of true. But it isn't a widely acknowledged reason. Most people just think that curved swords are curved because they're better at cutting, which I think is the main reason, okay? But they're absolutely true that because you have a curved blade, if, for example, someone's standing on guard here, if you're coming up with the point, or a false edge, as it's called here, with what Burton would call a manchette, or the French would call a manchette, cutting with the tip if it's a very curved blade, or the back edge if it's a less curved blade, you can come underneath someone's hand or guard to their forearm or wrist under here. But equally, that can be applied from any other angle. It could be coming downwards over the top of their parry. So say, for example, you come in with a cut with the edge and they parry that, you can flip the point around and poke them in the face with the point. That can also apply to thrusts coming around someone's guard. So if you meet opposition, for example, or even if there's no opposition, you can come around a person's blade or defense in order to thrust with that tip. And as I say, it can come downwards, come round, or it can come upwards. Additionally, this can also be applied to shields, and we see this perhaps most famously in the Ethiopian shotel sword, which admittedly is not curved this way, it's curved that way. But in that case, if the person puts the shield up, bam, you hit the top of their shield with the middle of your blade here, but the point still comes over and hits them in the face. You can, of course, if you're using a sabre like this Shamshir here from LK Chen, you can, of course, if a person's got a shield or a buckler, you can tempt their buckler up with that cut and then flip the point around to hit them in the face over the top, which is doing exactly the same thing as the shotel. So absolutely, a curved blade can be used to attack around bends and corners and parries, or indeed around shields, or potentially even over defensive works like the corner of a wall or a door or something like this if someone's hiding behind it. So that curve can be useful offensively in quite cunning ways. So we're back outside for the final and fourth point, and that is that very curved blades, or even slightly curved blades, are easier to wear and draw. I've put those 2 points into one thing. Why? Well, quite simply because the blade curves this way, when you are wearing it, it is not sticking out as far down towards the heel of your legs or towards other people who might be close to you. It is coming upwards and away from your heels, so when you're walking around, this is also very useful on horseback as well, when you've got stirrups and spurs sticking out and this kind of stuff. The blade essentially curves away from where your legs are moving, whether it's on a horse or on foot, and also away from the ground as well, which means when you crouch down, the tip of the blade is less likely to jam into the ground. This is a big problem with long straight swords like long swords and rapiers. You're constantly having to steer that tip and work out where it is. So curved swords are easier to wear in general, also because they curve around your body, they can take up less space, they can come in towards you and they stick out less likely to clash into things. But finally, to do with drawing. So if we think about drawing for a second, drawing is inherently an arc of movement. Okay, you're going to have to get the thing out here, and in fact with long straight blades this can be a big problem. In order to actually manage to get that long straight blade out, you have to basically train for it and have a certain harness that allows you to do that, and wear the sword usually quite low as well. But with a curved sword, because it follows the arc of movement of the arm, it comes out very, very smoothly and easily. Now, obviously people that have done iaido with Japanese swords will probably be aware of this, but that's only a very slightly curved blade. I would argue that the more curved the blade is, like with this shamshir, the more quickly and easily that thing comes out and more naturally, and that can therefore immediately be deployed either in offense or defense. Anyway, did you know all of these four? Get posting down below. I'd be interested. Maybe you can think of other advantages of the very curved blade, perhaps even to do with the manufacturing or storage or something else. Anyway, I hope this has been interesting. I have been Matt Easton. Of course, I'll continue to be, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.